Right, good evening, everybody. We'll wait for a few more people to pile in, and then I'll start going through our property that we're going to be discussing today.
Demand answers. You know who's on those flight logs.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to share my screen. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. So I'm gonna go over this deal that we had, which was a hybrid deal in Indianapolis, and I really wanted this house. This was on my hit list, and there was a couple of reasons for it. But Indianapolis is a market that we are heavily looking in. Um, the real estate prices are reasonable. You can still cash flow long-term rentals there. But this particular property was ideal from a couple of perspectives. But we'll get into that in a minute. So with this property, this was a single family property just north of downtown Indianapolis, and it was very close to all the centers of commerce, a lot of big businesses down there, the Children's Museum. There's just a great location. This also was literally feet away from public transit. And they have a pretty extensive public transit. I think it's a light rail. It was very close to bus routes. It was very close to that public transit. And I really, really liked this property. So as you can see, I'll just take you through a couple of quick pics on it. And it was a really nice looking little property. It was built in 1900. So it was older, and that's going to come into play in a moment when I start going through some of where I come up with the ARV. But it was lightly rehabbed. They didn't do much since the time they had bought it, with besides a few little updates. But this was a really nice property. As you can see in some of the pics, the floors are original, so there was no flooring upgrade done. The bathrooms were done at a minimal level. It was probably the owners before the seller who has it. I'm sorry, yeah, the original seller. So it was a moderate rehab. It's not the best I've ever seen, but it was a cool little house. The bathrooms are very blah. They're fundamental. So in comparison to some of the properties I used for their ARV, it was upgraded a little bit, but it was not anywhere near the caliber of some of the upgrades that commanded a higher price. And the cool thing about this was the upstairs, and this is what I was looking at, was the attic had been converted into quote unquote living space. But as you can see from this is a virtually staged picture, so that pool table and stuff isn't there. Is this could be split into bedrooms for a pad split. One of the things that we didn't know, and you can't really tell doing this remote, is how much room I had to that ceiling. From the pool table pictures, they were virtual. It looks like there'd be sufficient room, but we weren't 100% sure. And going through this property, it's going to be a really great example of, from a wholesaler's perspective to a buyer, is really working with your buyers and knowing your buyers' needs. And this will be pertinent to somebody who's also looking to be a buyer, or even someone who's looking to be a PML or a PMP on a deal. Of needing to make sure that that underwriting is done properly, and whoever has the deal is cooperating and sending you the information, because we had a little bit of challenge with the wholesaler on this one, due to the lack of information and due to the inaccuracy of some of the information. So in hindsight, I'm not 100% sure if they actually had it under contract, but we'll get into that in a second. So this was the deal that was sent over us by a wholesaler, and this is basically exactly what we had received. So we had received it. The purchase price was 298. The total entry was 38,000. It originally was 48,000, but they had lowered it to 38,000 plus closing costs. This particular wholesaler was not. I guess they either were covering the costs out of that with their entry fee, or they were inexperienced and not using a TC. So they specifically indicated that there was no TC fees in there, so we just had our side. The primary mortgage was 194K left. It was a hybrid deal. And so for those of you who don't know what that is that's a combination of taking something over creatively subject to, and also a seller finance carryback. So you have a blend of the two of those. And when you have a lot of high equity situations, which this one was relatively, we're not talking crazy numbers, but especially in today's day and age, if you have a property that was purchased in like 2019, 2020, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of equity, and there's a lot of hybrid deals. And I actually love them. It's a great way to get into a property that has a high deal of equity, without paying that person out. It depends on what their pain points are. So this had 194 left on the original first position mortgage, and it was at 3% interest rate. So phenomenal rate. The print that we had just gotten, we had gotten a breakdown of the PITI plus some of the breakdown of it as well. So the PITI for the first mortgage was 1323. The principal and interest was 871 of that, and there was about $450 of taxes and insurance. The second carryback, which is going to go into second position on this, was at 58,000, and that was also at 3%. It had a 5-year balloon on it. So the seller was looking for about a $260 a month payment for principal and interest, and a balloon out after 5 years where we would owe the differential of what's left on that note from some of the lien buy down over the course of that 5 years. So it was blared across with it being a 3-bedroom, 3-bath that had 3,632 square feet of living space. And that it was cash flowing all day long as a long-term rental, because rental rates were 2,400 plus per month, and there was no balloon on the sub 2. So great. It seems like a great deal. It piqued our interest, obviously. So we started digging into it. As we had received that and we started going into it with our underwriting, we had some questions back to the end buyer. So we wanted to know what the entry fee breakdown was. We had just gotten that first the 48,000, then it was the 38,000. So we have to do a lot of presumptions, and this is kind of the investigative work as an underwriter that you have to do if you are an end buyer or a PMP or a PML, is to kind of sift through this. So one takeaway from this, if there's any wholesalers in the group, is make sure that you're giving, your end buyers, number one, and that what information they're going to need. The more information that I can get, the better. But anybody who is serious about buying is going to ask for certain things, and it's pretty much standard. And if you're a good wholesaler, you're going to give that information up. I don't know why people are so apprehensive about giving an entry fee breakdown, just because they think that we're going to see what they're actually making as a wholesaler, an assignment fee. And if you've negotiated the deal well enough, you should be completely fine with your end buyers paying that out and not having any embarrassment, any closed door behind the curtain things with what your assignment fee is. You negotiated a great deal, so you should get paid for it. And I will pay my wholesalers all day long, providing it is meeting our buy box and it's cash flowing. So I had to make some assumptions on this, and this is all information that we went back to the wholesaler to try to obtain, and we got somewhat stonewalled. We got very little information out of them, and that makes it difficult for you to dispo the deal. I mean that's just apparent, and that's fundamental. But the entry fee breakdown was one of the things that we asked for as we had put it through the initial pass and needed some more information to fully underwrite it. But we were really interested in this property. I loved this property. That we knew there was an agent involved. It was on Zillow. It was on Zillow for a much low. I wouldn't say much lower, but it was about. I think it was about 20,000 lower that it was on the market for. And we presumed that there was probably some cash to the seller, and then some of that was going to the wholesaler, which is totally fine. We asked for the original contract. That is very typical of buyers to ask for the original contract in a sub-2 transaction, is because I need to review the original terms of that deal. If you don't want to expose your assignment fee and your breakdown and some of the original numbers, I have a little bit of an issue with that. I prefer to see that, and I don't think that there should be any reason you should hide it. But if you're not comfortable with it, I completely understand. But at least send that out with it blocked out or blacked out with some of the numbers if you don't want to break down your entry fee. But I need to see that original contract. I need to see exactly what I'm getting into and what the terms are of it, so that I am protected on the back end when I'm going to the B2C contract for the assignment contract end. And then also we had a question with the reported living space. So I will typically take it a little bit further than probably most do, but I really dive into the tax records. I do that for two reasons. Is number one, I don't want to get blindsided with anything that is going to have like a homestead exemption on it that I'm not going to get as an investor. Texas is notorious for that. Indianapolis in Indiana actually does have a homestead exemption that they can apply for. So that is pertinent in this deal. But
Can't do it on investment properties, you jackwagon.
So anyway, so we've got the reported living space. When I had dove into that, the tax records, I took a look at it, and it was only showing a little bit over 2,600, just under 2,700 square feet. So I was asking the wholesaler if they knew what the deal was, as far as why there was such a huge discrepancy in the square footage. It did have a basement, but it was unfinished. And I was wondering if they were including that in the square footage, but that wouldn't be considered living square footage unless it was a finished basement. And then typically with finished basements, you're only getting about 50% of that square footage that's going into the final calculations for the ARV. So I do check that. I do check that quite often with making sure that the listing, because MLS is wrong sometimes. The agent gets it wrong. The seller gets it wrong. That's telling it to the agent. And that's really one of the better things that you can do, is to make sure that the tax records are accurate, or they at least line up to know what the legal, I guess the legal definition of that property and the square footage, the living square footage actually is. So we had that question out to the wholesaler, and they couldn't exactly answer it. And then we had to make some presumptions on the entry. So it was a $38,000 entry. We knew there was an agent involved. We figured that it was probably about a 3% fee to the seller's agent. So that's about $8,900. And then there was $29,000 that was sitting on the table. So we don't know where that's getting divvied up. We don't know how that's getting divvied up. And that is going to be important when I start to run my numbers. And when I start to run my numbers, that will tell me what levers I can pull to make suggestions of how we can make this a deal if it is not cash flowing as is. And there's also some presumptions of the seller. So they had it on the market for $280,000. And the seller was, basically having it on for $280,000 with an agent. It wasn't selling for some reason. They were willing to basically accept $252,000 for that after about 8 to 10% of closing costs, and that's barring, the fact that they might get a lower offer. That's barring the fact of anybody asking for concessions, which is very common these days in the market that we're in. Also, possibly a rate buy down. So we knew that they were willing to accept, 252,000 essentially after fees, and the net to the seller was going to be just shy of 60 grand, and that is exactly the number of the seller carryback. So that really raised my eyebrows. Is that number had to be figured in there some way. So we knew that the seller was looking to walk away with at least $58,000. And I just found that interesting that that was the same exact number as the seller carryback. So we'll start going into some of the underwriting of this. And we had put it through. It failed as a long-term rental. There was no way that this was going to work as a long-term rental as the deal was presented. Midterm rental, it was still failing. And mainly with a midterm rental, that is because it is, you have, furnishing costs, and you also have a higher property management fee every single month. That can be anywhere from 12 to 15%. If I'm looking for an Indianapolis property that I want to turn into a midterm rental, this actually would have been a great midterm rental, just because of its proximity to a lot of business in Indianapolis. And it was a really nice area. It's a really nice property. So this would have been a potential if it cash flowed as a midterm rental. But unfortunately, the first two failed. So we were looking at it as a co-living. I loved the fact that it was so close to public transit, and there was space in the rear of this property when we did a Google Earth view of it, where we'd be able to get several cars in there and even possibly cut into the yard with changing some of the fencing to allow even more parking. So we'd be able to accommodate what we thought would originally fit 7 bedrooms, and we would add 4 more bedrooms on there. And we'd be able to accommodate that inside the house, but we'd also be very close to public transit, and we'd also be very close to, be close to public transit, and we'd also have that plethora of parking in the back, which is kind of odd, but it's very typical of Indianapolis. I don't know if anybody's ever underwritten some of those properties or looked at them in Indy, but there's a lot where the garage is detached and it's in the back. It's in like a side access road, and the front of the house is very, typical of like a stoop, and there's no driveway or garage and et cetera in the front. It's pretty cool, but that is very typical of Indianapolis. So as we were putting this through, the first pass with my first underwriter, this looked like it was penciling out. He had put in there that the weekly rates looked like it was about 185 a week. If we had 7 bedrooms, we were looking at income of about $5,600. So this looked very positive. The way the outline is from the house and some of the pictures that I shared, you could see it was pretty spacious, and it would have been a pretty easy convert with turning that attic into a couple of additional bedrooms, providing some caveats were crossed over, and we understood exactly what it was, because it's very difficult to do these things remote and to do them online with just looking at pictures. And we also didn't get very many pictures. We had to rely on Zillow and old listings and Privy to some degree, because you can take, a lot of times they'll have pictures of the MLS listing, but also of previous listings from when they had bought it for before and after. But we felt comfortable that we could get an additional 4 bedrooms in this property. So it looked like it was a pretty decent return. So even with a PML, it was looking like it was about a 9% cash on cash return, which was pushing it to the next level of underwriting. So when we actually got into it here, let me just move this quick. There we go. So when we actually got into it, we did a full extensive underwrite because it was a potential property, and we wanted to explore all of our options. So when we do this is just our personal business mindset and methodology. Is even though that had failed on the original sniff test that we do, we will put it through all 3 of our exit strategies on once we get the deal that has moved where one of them is hitting, and we'll underwrite it for all of them. What we typically do, and what my suggestion is, if you're an end buyer, is you want to always have at least two exits on a property. And most of the time is we're looking for long-term rentals as one of those as a backup. And if it's something like this particular property, which is a really good example of this, is that this is killing it, what we thought would be killing it as cash flowing for a pad split or a co-living. This is losing a little bit of money every single month. So if shit hit the fan and we had to revert it back to either a midterm rental or a long-term rental, taking $1,000 a year hit is not going to, it's not going to break the bank. So we're okay with that little bit of a cash flow loss on a long-term rental. But we want to take a look at that and just see what our risk factor is there. But that is the general suggestion, is that you always make sure that you have at least two exits on the property, where you can revert to if something goes wrong with one of them. So on this particular prop, as the deal was presented, it was losing a little bit of money. It was losing about $80 a month. That probably could have been easily rectified with a little bit of time as rents go up, hopefully. I know that we're in a little bit of a flat period, and they have flatlined, and in some places they have retracted a little bit, like especially out here in Phoenix. We've had a little bit of rent rate loss, and having to give some concessions and things of that nature. So barring we go through another cycle of that, it's it's going to it's going to lose a little bit of money. And we probably make that up in subsequent years, 2, 3, where we'd be able to raise those rent rates and be able to start cash flowing it slightly. So not absolutely awful, but we still in the end we felt like this deal had a lot of loose ends and also was not ideally structured. So we'll walk through this as a long-term rental as it is. And this looks a little bit different than my previous calculators, and I apologize. This was put into one of my prototypes of the one that I'm building out. So I do apologize about that it looks a little bit different, but this will give you a little bit of an inkling of where that calculator is going, and what we're using for our full-blown calculator. So over here, we're looking at, there's no way that was cash flowing 2,400 plus a month. Maybe as a midterm rental, but definitely not as a long-term rental as it was being plastered over. And I think what, unfortunately, the wholesaler did, which is not uncommon, is they went into either Zillow Manager, or they went on Rentcast, or they went on one of the other rental analysis sites, and just took the highest number that they could find, because they'll often give you a range, and they'll just take the highest number to promote their deal. I can't really fault them in that. I would try to do that if I was trying to sell something and promote it, but on the same token, it's inaccurate, right? And your end buyers are gonna figure that out. So with the deal that we had in front of us, we projected that to be about just shy of $2,000 a month, where the rent rates would be. For affordable housing, for some reason, .com didn't have this zip code in it. So we had to take it out of 5 instead of our usual 6, which was a little bit unusual, and I thought that was strange. We didn't have it property management verified at that point. We did have it rent range verified, and I just must have not got to update it, because I do have that report that we actually paid for it. So we hadn't got to the point where we were reaching out to property management companies, because we needed a little bit more information from the wholesaler, and we also wanted to see if we could renegotiate some of this deal a little bit, but just because we weren't 100% comfortable that this was a smash out of the park and it was a home run. So looking at the entry fees, as I said, it was just as is, $38K. So our total entry into this property, as the deal was presented, was just under $60K for a long-term rental. And as you can see, it's on the right-hand side here. It's the entry percentage was a little bit higher than what we're looking at to get in all in. This is just our company's kind of barometer and our baseline is all in, including all of the additional entry fees that are encountered, not just, the debt service, et cetera, or the assignment fee and things of that nature, is we're looking at to be all in for about 15%. And this was closing in on almost 20% to get into this property. So, as I've mentioned before, we do have an acquisition fee for ourselves. I have to pay my team, I have to pay my underwriters, I have to pay my property project managers, our operations managers. So I have to pay my team internally if they're involved in the deal. But yeah, in the end, this just did not pencil out. It just wasn't penciling out as a long-term rental. I'll get to the restructure that you see here in a moment. Midterm rental was an absolute disaster, and that, like I was saying, that is predominantly because of the property management fees being, anywhere from 12 to 15%. I believe that we had a property management company. We don't currently own anything in Indianapolis at this moment right now, but we've looked extensively in there. I believe that we have a midterm rental property management company that's around 12%, so that's probably why it's in there. And then the increased vacancy factor, because you need to make the presumptions that it's not like a long-term rental where you have somebody locked in there. You are figuring in that fudge factor of at least being vacant a month or two per year. So that's why that vacancy factor is a little bit higher. But as you can see on the right-hand side here, or you can see up top where my gauges are, is the cash on cash for this is a disaster. It was losing, $1,200 a year, and that was as is. That was coming in with our own money. Once you add in a PML or a PMP, it was absolutely disastrous. So midterm rental option wasn't really there. I was a little bit surprised, to be honest with you, with this deal. Is I thought that the midterm rental rates with like Furnish Finder and Airbnb was going to be a little bit higher because of the location of this, and how nice of a property it was. Also, its proximity to public transportation, for a traveling nurse or somebody that is there for a corporate relocation. I thought it was going to be a little bit higher, but all these numbers are pretty tight and hugging each other. So I'm really comfortable with that being probably about $2,800 a month for a midterm rental there. Co-living. So this is where this deal was really crushing it. If we could get 7 bedrooms into this property, after I did a little bit further analysis, I saw that the projected weekly rates were actually a little bit higher. So we could get 197. There wasn't anything in this exact zip code, but there were 2 zip codes that hug it that were in that range. And their occupancy was a little bit low, but their weekly room rates for where those zip codes were located are pretty high. So it was 197 is what we had figured out from doing some of their data analytics on their website. I've showed that before of how to go in there and do that from a previous padsplit that we have broken down. We didn't have this verified with the padsplit regional manager. This is one of their core markets. So it's an established market. There are plenty of padsplits there. So we didn't have an opportunity to reach out whoever their regional representative was for Indianapolis at this time. I think I have his number, but just from looking at other properties. But we didn't do that yet because we were still in analysis mode and still looking to see where this deal was going to actually land before we start going through that legwork of making those calls and verifying that type of stuff. So, coming into this at the end of the day, is this had, as the deal presented, it had about a 9% cash on cash return, and it was cash flowing about $8,800 a month. I'm sorry, a year. And it was about $1,000 a month, a little bit over. So this looked like it had a lot of potential. This is not a great return for a pad split because of the amount of work that goes into it. But we were comfortable with that return and exploring it to see if we could get this deal restructured and see if we could salvage something out of it. The PML on this, if we brought in a private money lender for those entry costs, the construction, all of those things, we still would have been a little bit of positive cash flow after the initial move-in month. But it was slightly negative in a loss as the deal was structured. And the PMP, this is a really 4.6% return. Those returns are infinite for us, right? Because they're coming in with all of that cash. So it's not very attractive at where it is right now at 4.6%. So someone's going to come in and they're going to lay down, almost $97,000. They're going to want a better return than 4.6. They could put that into a Chase reserve account and get 5%. I know that they don't have the depreciation, some of the appreciation, the tax benefits of owning that with putting your money in a bank, but that's just still not really attractive to a PMP or any of the PMPs that we have. So if you have one that's interested in a 4.6 return, please send it my way if you could. But it just wasn't a good deal as it was structured. So one of the things that we always do is we try to offer solutions once we understand more of the deal parameters. So we always try to offer solution to our wholesalers because we care about our wholesalers. As much as I might sound like I'm coming down on them a little bit, we depend on them. They're the ones that send us these deals. They're the one out there in the foxholes getting these deals, getting them under contract, and it's a grind. It's tough. We've all done it. Well, most of us have probably done it, and it's a grind. It's a very tough thing to do. So we love our wholesalers, but sometimes you need a little bit of help structuring the deal. And at the end of the day, before I go into the restructure that I had suggested to at least get this in favorable terms with both the seller, the wholesaler, and ourselves. There's a couple of different ways we could have gone with this property. So we could have had, a couple of different ways that we could have divvied up that money, but the fact remained we don't know exactly what was going on inside that deal. And at the end of the day, as I saw this unfold and I saw what subsequently happened with the property, is I don't think the seller was highly motivated. I really honestly don't. I think it was just locked up for the sake of locking it up at whatever they could get the seller to agree to a subject to deal, and there wasn't that much negotiation that was done with the seller. I honestly don't think that there was a lot of pain points for this particular seller. Where they needed to get rid of the property. I think it had been sitting on the market for a little bit. And that's a little bit of an interesting point that I want to bring up really quickly. So this property, I was a little bit surprised as well that this property hadn't moved. It had sat on the market for a while. I think they started at like 340 or something like that. And they had brought it all the way down to 280. And it's decently updated, but I don't know if there is something when people were walking into that property that was setting alarm bells off, because a lot of the properties surrounding it were much smaller and they were commanding prices that were above 280. And some of them were updated, some of them were not updated. The ones that were updated and were smaller, like around 16 to 1800 square feet, they were selling for a higher price point. They were selling anywhere from 330 to 340. And I was kind of surprised at that it wasn't moving. So something must be going on with this property at 280. It wasn't moving still after they've lowered it almost, $30,000 or $40,000. So the ARV that I actually came up with on the property was $364,000. I had just used one comp on this one to get the ARV very quickly. If we had moved forward, I definitely would have gone into a deeper analysis of that to make sure that number was right. But the one that was the comp property was absolutely gorgeous. It was almost the same square footage. It was almost the exact same floor plan. It was built within, I think, 3 or 4 years of this particular property. And it was absolutely a gorgeous property. That one also had an exterior garage that was, I get, basically updated with the house, that it looked like a mini house of the original house, almost like a little dollhouse. It was an awesome property, and that sold for, it was over 400. I think it was like 411 or 412, and it was a couple of blocks over. So I was kind of scratching my head in the backfield, thinking, why isn't this property moving? It just doesn't make too much sense. The market is falling a little bit in Indianapolis and certain. And, well, I'll just mute that person. Hold on one second. All right, got him. So the market it's wavering a little bit in Indianapolis. Things are taking a little bit longer to sell, and it's pretty much the story around the country. But there are still some hot zip codes that are doing really well. It's still a seller's market, but it's starting to flatten out there. They're starting to be impacted by everything. So you're seeing a lot of price reductions and things of that nature. But I was really surprised at the square footage that was in that house, as to that not being sold at at 280, because it probably needs, I don't know, it probably needs about 30 to 35,000 of work that needs to go into into the property to get it up to that level of the other property. But that's not that much. And one of the biggest things with that is the fact that, I think if you recall back to my let's go back to the pictures really quick, is, well, a lot of the remodels that have been done for the comp properties, they had updated the HVAC system in here. And let me see if I have a good picture of it. So if you're looking at it over here, you see no air vents in the ceilings. It's still on the original old venting system inside this house. And I think that the HVAC hasn't been updated, which would probably be $15,000 to $20,000 to do that for a good system. But all of that is still, probably from the 1900s build, of that heating and cooling source still being the original. And if you look up here in the attic, which was kind of a follow through concern that we had as the deal was there, and we were looking to do it as a pad split. If you look up here, there does not appear to be any venting system for the ceiling. So heating and cooling would have been something that we would have had to bring up to the attic, if there wasn't something hidden there that we weren't aware of and the wholesaler wasn't aware of, if we wanted to put bedrooms up there. So that put a little bit of a caution with us, with the deal as it was. And so I think that maybe that might be some of the reason that it hasn't sold. I'm not exactly sure because it's a nice property. But when I had originally sent this back to the wholesaler, I'm okay with a break-even long-term rental, providing one of my other exits is our predominant one, and we're going to make a good deal of cash flow off it. So with this one, what I had come in is I started stripping it apart. Like I was saying before, we got a little bit stonewalled by the wholesaler. They wouldn't send us the contract. They wouldn't send us the original contract for us to look at it. They wouldn't even send it blacked out with some of the numbers. They didn't have information as to why it was put in there as,
Couldn't find the door, had to use a light.
And let me get that. Got him. As to why the square footage was off, as to what was in the tax records as livable space. So we had a couple of challenges with the wholesaler and forthcoming with information. They wouldn't really go into detail about what their motivation was, what was their what are they needing to get out of the deal, what the agent involvement is with it, if they were stonewalling them. So we have to come across with some sort of suggestion. So we started corresponding with the wholesaler and just said, hey, this isn't a buy for us at the way that the terms of this deal are put in there right now. And we explained it. We went through some of the numbers, and that's funny. Someone's drawing on my thing. So we went through some of the numbers. We explained, where we had gotten them, what the rent rates were looking like for long-term rentals, and we basically laid out what you see in front of you today as our analysis back to them, and just said, hey, this isn't working for us. Is there an opportunity that you can go back and renegotiate some of this? And I am not 100% confident they actually had it under contract, because that is typical when they won't send you the contract, is they have verbal agreements and they've got something working in the side, but they don't actually have it physically under contract in writing. But anyhow, so one of the things that I went back to, I saw where that number mirrored for this particular, what the seller was looking for. So I was like, hey, let's take a look at this and see if we can get him close to what the asking price is for, that should have been updated to 270, I think. Hang on one second. Let me just, yeah, because I think we had renegotiated the asking price to 278. It was just below. It was pretty much at what they were. It just must have, I got updated in here, that we were pretty much, they were asking for on market. We'll give him his 58,000 that he wants to get out of this property. And if he's going to get that with us paying the agent commission and the closing costs, let's have him carry it at 0%. So he's getting his money. We can give him a 5-year balloon, even though I don't like to go below 7. We'll give him a 5-year balloon on it. He's going to carry it at 0%. We'll give him a little bit of cash up front, and we'll be able to make the numbers work for the pad split. So this is as a long-term rental, and still all these numbers are still the same. The underlying mortgage, there's nothing you can do about that. That's firm and in stone. So we were looking at giving 7,500 to them now, carrying that 58,000 as a 0% seller carryback for that end of it. We'll pay a $5,000 assignment fee to get this deal off your plate, and we'll take care of closing costs, and we'll take care of the agent's commission, which we're presuming it was about 3%. So it'd be about just shy of $9,000. So that would make the numbers work as far as a break even on the long-term rental. So as you can see over here on the right-hand side, that restructure with them taking that back as 0% and giving them a little bit of cash now, probably not as much as was the original deal. We were cash flowing a whole $2 a month. So $28 a year was what we'd be cash flowing into that deal as is, without bringing in a PML or a PMP. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with break even cash flow on a long-term rental, providing that we have one of our other exits that's much more lucrative. PMP still on this. There's no way that you're going to get a PML or a PMP. It's really for reference as we were going back to our co-living original drive, to go back and look at that. So when you look at the restructure in that suggestion that I had made, same suggestion, same parameters, etc. But these numbers on the right-hand side look a whole hell of a lot better. So it's it was cash flowing $1,100 a month. It was that cash on cash increased a little bit. With a PML, it would cash flow under 1%. And I've said it before, I've said it a million times. Technically, that money, when you're borrowing it, that's infinite cash flow, cash on cash return for you, right? You're not putting any dollars out of your pocket. And so all of that net annual cash flow of about $300 is in your pocket. But is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it worth going into do all of that legwork for all that construction, the management that goes into it, all of that stuff, for a pretty low cash on cash return? But it does, as a PMP, that we have interest from somebody else who wants to get into the Indianapolis market. They don't necessarily want to be involved in the day-to-day in the operations. So this would be ideal to them. Ordinarily, we were looking for, usually about an 8% return for our PMPs. This was a little bit under, but the total return on investment is higher because you're taking into the factor the tax deductions that they can participate in, the appreciation eventually, the depreciation that you can get on the property. So all of those things come into factor for that total ROI that would be probably attractive to somebody to get that kind of a return. And I think that if we had gotten 7 bedrooms in here, I think that, for the proximity it was to public transit, because I was looking at some of the other properties that were on padsplit in the area. I think we probably could have nudged that number up a little bit, to be honest with you. And it would have cash flowed a little bit more. So worst case scenario, it would have been, about a 6.2% return. I was actually okay with if this could have been renegotiated to bump that up for the cash flow to the private money partner a little bit more than a 50-50 split to get us in a property that's cash flowing with nothing out of pocket. So in order to make, sweeten that deal. But this is kind of where we ended up, and we pretty much fell on deaf ears. So I said that, look, this is just a starting point. This is my suggestion to, start renegotiating this, because you're going to have a tough time finding a buyer. It's just not working across too many exits. And the entry in it as is too high. And, you could take a look at like doing something like a lease option or a wrap in some of the more, I don't want to say they're exotic because they're not, but just some of the other options you have as a exit strategy. You could look at those, and you might have buyers that are interested in this because it has such a low rate. That's just not in our wheelhouse. But I think the entry in this is too high for any scenario that you are looking at, even though it's not ones that we particularly might do in our business. So it pretty much fell on deaf ears. I think that they probably tried to go and renegotiate a little bit, and at just the end of the day, there was not a lot of motivation on the seller's behalf. So, we kind of had some discussions with a wholesaler, and ultimately they came back and said it's this deal or leave it. There's no more room. There's no more negotiation, and this is the deal as it's presented. And I was very polite and professional. I just said, hey, look, I don't think that we're going to, you're going to find a buyer for it. And they ultimately did not. They could not dispo this. It went back. It went back to the seller. As far as, going back to the agent being on market. And this, I like to follow up on properties just to see kind of what they do. And we use that as our internal, some metrics as well to see the number of properties that actually get scooped up. It's a little bit of housekeeping. It helps me with understanding if maybe I didn't underwrite something as thoroughly as I should have, and I missed something that someone else picked it up and got a deal that I missed out on. But I also like to see where my underwriting and where this skill kind of takes me as far as what's going to end up happening to the property. But in the end, I took a look at this property about a month or so after, and it went back to the seller. Like I said, they took it off the market, and the guy just rented it out. And guess what he got for his rent, presumably, because there's no definitives with understanding what something rented out for, unless the agent or it's listed on there. But it rented for $2,000 a month. That's what it got taken off the market as, and that's presumable that someone came in and rented it at that rate. There could have been some negotiation in there, who knows? But probably it rented out for $2,000. So very good case study. And I like this for a couple of reasons. Is I like to go back in there and see how I can help negotiate that, and what structure it would be for us to be buyers and probably other buyers. If what I suggest and how I can make it work for me as a buyer, it'll probably work for others. And I hope that we have a relationship that's good enough that you're not going to do that. But yeah, you could end up shopping this to another investor, and my suggestion was something you utilized, and it got sold to them instead of me. But that's okay. It happens, and it's fine. I'm always offering to do that for our wholesalers. But this was a really great case study of some wholesaler either inexperience or missteps, but also really where if you don't have a highly motivated seller, you know, a lot of these deals just don't work. If you have someone that's just giving lip service to the deal that they're getting into to move it, but it's, you know, if it's at really good terms for them, you know, that's usually not a great terms for an investor. So this was a really good case study, and I wanted to kind of go through it for education purposes across the board. Is looking out for yourself as a wholesaler, of getting to know really what your buyers are looking for, and also, you know, sometimes listening to their suggestions and how that needs to be structured for someone to be a buyer on it. But also with you know, seeing where this deal had ultimately gone and seeing that, you know, our underwriting is pretty damn accurate. I mean, that's what they got for the long-term rental. That's also ultimately, you know, where we knew that there were not going to be other buyers for this, just because it was put together, to be honest, and say it. It just wasn't a well put together deal that was attractive to an investor. It might have been attractive to maybe a homestead buyer, but you know, that would have been a whole different scenario, and it's a whole different underwriting experience when you're looking for yourself. But anybody have anybody have any questions on the deal, or any comments before I open it up uh, to kind of the group to take a look at some other questions and comments that I typically do for the last 5 to 10 minutes of the Zoom. George, I know you got a question. Just kidding.
Not a question, just appreciation for what you do, and hearing you out. Obviously, that's more of the geeky stuff, and like I said, it is what I'm noticing and the things that pop out. It is, no matter where you're at in the process, it is about chasing the relationship. It is about giving you everything that you need in order to make this a deal, and appreciate your feedback to where I can come back to the seller and say, and it does come back to the motivation to where, like you mentioned that too, like the seems like the wholesaler was trying to lock something up, and
It
it looked
was.
good to themselves, but maybe it didn't look good for you or the potential buyer, and that's who we are serving at the end of the day to keep bringing more deals together.
Yeah, yeah. In the way I had restructured that, and that was just one suggestion that I had made that would have made the deal work for us, right? If they had gone back and renegotiated that and come back with different terms that were, you know, maybe something similar where there was a lever that they could pull, fantastic. I'll take a look at it. You know, and that particular one got the seller exactly what they wanted. There was a little bit of a delayed gratification with getting the money they wanted out of it,
Mhm.
but you know, in that original deal structure, there probably wasn't that much more than $7,500 that was going to the seller. I do have a sneaking suspicion there was a huge assignment fee on it. But you know, who knows, right? You have no idea. But you're absolutely correct, George. You hit the nail on the head. Is as a wholesaler or a buyer, your relationship with the other party is paramount. It's critical. You know, we have to work in conjunction. I'm the end user, right? I'm looking to buy a
Right.
product from you, but on the same token, is, you know, I'm dependent on you, but you're also dependent on me. You're
Right.
dependent on me as the customer. So it's paramount to make sure. And I don't ever expect a wholesaler that's trying to jam as many deals as they can through their pipeline a month to go into that level of detail that I go into. You know, I
Right.
mean, that's just not going to happen, right? But there needs to be a little bit more underwriting and reality that comes into it from the wholesaler side.
True.
And I'm actually trying to work on that to find something that is our quick analysis calculator is really good.
Mhm.
And it can give you a really good frame of reference, but there are still steps that need to be done kind of manually that are time consuming. But yeah, I'm trying to look at ways that we can expedite that so it's a
Mhm.
lot easier. However, that's a whole other side calculator that I'm working on currently right now. So
Gotcha. Yeah. And I know that comes with time because it is doing this for about 3 years to where if I watched it right now, I wouldn't understand nothing. But because now you are in a part of the negotiation, you are understanding the numbers, then it's giving you what you need, and then me getting the feedback. And now it does make sense of why I need to go back to the seller with certain numbers. But it does, in reality, go back to the motivation. Like, well, sir, didn't you say you really wanted to go see your daughter, or you wanted to actually retire?
Right.
This way it's going to actually do that, and that, I guess, that's where what helps out being the uncovering everything like Pace shares with us, finding
Yeah.
the bunnies in the first place.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's an easy thing to fall into, and I understand how it happens when you're a newbie. If you're a new wholesaler, like, you just want to get a deal, right? You're super
Right.
excited. I remember, like, when I was first in and trying to get my first deal. I mean, I would have taken probably 150 over market on that property, and, like, been all excited. I just it's the thrill of the hunt when you first start getting into it.
Yes.
But I understand it from that perspective. But it's just an education period, and then you start to get to know what buyers are looking for, and things of that nature. And it's good, but it's all about that relationship. And I can't stress that enough. But having some degree of underwriting skills is critical across the board, right? Obviously, as buyers, if you're trying to buy and you don't know how to underwrite, you better have somebody on your team that knows how to do that. If you're a PML or a PMP, you need to have that, either someone on the team or you're doing it yourself, and you have that deep knowledge of being how to underwriting. Wholesaling, you don't have to have that deep of a knowledge, but you do need to understand what goes into underwriting. And I think it's a critical skill set as a wholesaler to be able to discern that when you're getting properties, and knowing whether you're going to have something that is not going to dispo easy, or something that is going to be dispoing out the door all day long.
True.
So anyway, yeah. Any other questions? Anybody have any comments or things they want to ask me for the last couple of minutes?
Hey, James, I got a couple for you.
Sure. Shoot.
For the property taxes, how do you do the calculation when whenever you do purchase the property? How do you factor in the new property taxes that they're going to charge you?
Awesome question. That's a phenomenal question. And I think that is something that a lot of buyers don't anticipate when they go to run their numbers. So I do one of two things. If I'm at the beginning stages of it, and it doesn't look like it's a buy signal for us, or it's a very light buy signal, I won't go into deep diving into taxes unless the numbers don't match up like that they did on that one. That just happened to catch my eye. But I will go into it's called Netro online, and I will go in there and I will see if I can go to the county assessor's website. They have a direct link there. So if you go into Netro online and you can put in the zip code, it'll tell you the county, and then it'll pull up all the different things that are with that municipality. And sometimes it's a little bit of a guessing game. Sometimes it's on the assessors. Sometimes it's under something else, like another different division. So you have to kind of go searching to figure it out. But to answer the question is, I am always looking to get to see what their I'm drawing a blank on what it is. Sorry. I'm looking to see what their tax rate is, and then I am being overly cautious to go in there to see if it's going to reset once I purchase the property, because it goes municipality by municipality, it goes by county. Sometimes they are on top of it, and as soon as there's a higher purchase price that they see on the records, they will start slapping additional taxes on there at the new rate, right? And if it's something like Arizona, where it's not going to reset until next year, I will go in there and try to factor that in there to figure out what those taxes are going to be. And then in the millage rate, that's what I was trying to think of. So I'm looking to find and figure out what the millage rate is, and then I multiply that by the new purchase price. Sometimes that's not entirely accurate, and just to be transparent, property taxes, to figure them out to the penny across, because we're buying across the United States, except for a couple of, select states. It's a pain in the ass. Everybody has different tax structures, but that is a general rule of thumb. You can do that and get relative accuracy of knowing what they're going to be, but I'm always going in there and looking for what that millage rate is. Another good place to go into is, let me pull it up really quick, and it's, hang on one second. Smart Asset. So Smart Asset has a calculator for property taxes, and I haven't found them as accurate as actually going in, obviously, to the individual state, individual county treasurer or whatever department they have it under, the assessor's department. But you can get a quick and dirty from Smart Asset, and you put it in, you put in the zip code, it'll give you the tax rate percentage, which is basically the millage rate, and then multiply it out by your new purchase price. And I'll put a caveat on that is I get that for a rough idea. I wouldn't use that as my best and final. And the reason I don't is because you don't know how that particular county is looking at the appraised value versus the sales price, or sometimes it's a completely different value, like it is in Arizona, that we have a limitation on the amount that it can go up based on sale price. And it's a nightmare trying to do that with the patchwork of counties across the place. But I always go in there to in one way or another, I'm always trying to anticipate what those are going to possibly go up to. And one of the other things that I'm looking for quite often is I'm looking at the actual tax bill in certain cases to see if they have exemptions on there. Like I was saying, like during the Zoom, Texas is freaking notorious for that. So they can have VA exemptions, they can have homestead exemptions, and your property taxes can double sometimes with taking out those exemptions. So it's always like I have that built into my calculator. We always go in there and double check them to make sure that it's it's not a county that we're not familiar with, where we know we're going to get that ripped away from us being investors and being investor owned, where we have to add in that additional expense every single month for property taxes. But fantastic question. I was waiting for someone to finally ask me that. I'm glad you asked me that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so just to repeat what you said, so county assessor's office, and you said Metro Online.
Oh, Netro, Netro. I'll put the link in the chat of where I go to get that. Hang on one second.
Awesome. And one last quick question before I let you go. So to make sure that the square footage is exactly what the wholesalers say it is, it's just basically looking up the property under the county assessor office.
Yep, correct.
Okay.
Most of the time, I would say, if it's been listed, most of the time it's correct, right? It just if I'm going through fully with a property, you'll damn be sure that I'm gonna do that, right? I'm gonna go into the county and make sure that the square footage is everything. Because when I go to get an appraisal, if it's down the line for something that I'm going to refinance or whatever, I need to make sure that that square footage is there, right? That the value of the property is there. Most of the time it's right. When you have a Zillow listing or it comes directly from the MLS, most of the time it's right. But I do, every time that we're going to like pull the trigger and this is a deal that we're acquiring, I will always go in there just to make sure. So I just posted it in there. It's called Netro Online with an N as in Nancy. And you just go into the section. If you scroll down, like you can go in by state and then you have to figure out what county it is. So if you know the name of it, you can easily go in there. But I typically will go into the zip code. I'll punch in the zip code and it has a converter from the zip code to the county. And then once I'm into that county, all of those things will come in. And then I just got to kind of pick and choose. Most of them are under the assessor's office, but sometimes they're under like bizarre places where you find the actual property tax documents. But yeah, I always go in there to see what the actual property legally has defined as the living square footage. And I will do that if it catches my eye, like that one happened to. But I usually will not do that unless it's at the final, when the 11th hour, like we're at the final stages of it, just to make sure before we're going to send basically the assignment contract. We're going to sign that. I'll make sure that we cross those T's and dot those I's.
Right. Thank you, James. I appreciate it.
Of course. Excellent questions.
Thank you.
I love All right. Anybody else have their hand raised? No. All right, guys. Two things that I want to cover before we go is we were offering a version of our calculator. So you can reach out to Haley or myself, and you can get a version of that kind of that quick analysis that I'm happy to share with everybody. Like I've said before, my full bore calculator is actually still under construction for the final product of where I want it, but it's a proprietary calculator. I will be putting it out there for a nominal fee, but it won't be the full calculator. It'll be that quick analysis, which is pretty good. It'll give you a pretty good rough estimate of where you're at on a deal pretty quickly. And then the other thing is, one thing that I wanted to do this week and kind of test out and see how it goes is if you have a deal that you need underwritten that you're taking a look at, I'd like you to send that to either myself or Haley, and I'm going to choose one or two of them to do and underwrite it kind of live on the next week's Zoom. So I want to see how that goes and see if it's going to be something that would benefit the group. But I kind of wanted to put out there a little bit more time to go into some deals that you might have, so we can go through them and kind of live underwrite them. It is a little bit easier, obviously, because of all the screens that I go to in the software, et cetera. If I have the deal a little bit ahead of time, just so I can get that prepared as far as knowing where I need to go on a deal, and it's not my forte with running the Zoom and having all these things open at the same time with all the softwares. But yeah, if you want to send over a deal to have it looked at, we're going to choose one or two of them, and I'm going to go through them, and we're going to break it down. And if you don't want the address put out there specifically, that's totally fine. I can abbreviate that, or I can take the address out completely, and just say, hey, it's in Indianapolis or whatever, and hide that from the group. So, I'm hoping that no one would snake a deal, but it happens. It happens. So I completely understand. But yeah, I want to offer that to the group to be able to do that, and to be able to kind of live underwrite and get into some deals where we're looking at others to do that for you guys, and take you through it a little bit deeper at a deeper level, so you can get a good perspective on your potential property. So if you want to reach out and send them over, we're going to be making our choice before next week, probably Sunday or Monday, and I'm happy to do it with you and run that through. And like I said, if you don't want the address out there, totally cool with that. I'll just blur it out and not put it into some of the information. All right, guys. I appreciate very much everybody being here. I thank you very much. And like always, reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. I'm always open to feedback. All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye bye.